Okay, hello everyone. Welcome back to Intro to iOS Development. Today we're going to be talking about some pretty crucial aspects of iOS development. So right now we've only been working on apps with like one screen, but after this class you should be more comfortable with not just one screen, but like how do you switch between screens and like make your app more rich and interactive. But before we start, Shruti, who is on the marketing team of Polo, has like a quick announcement.
Yeah, hey guys, so I'm Shruti, I'm on the Polo app team, and we're going to continue our beta testing this semester, so you guys will be using Polo shortly in lecture today. To provide some context, Polo is an education tool that provides an interactive platform between students and instructors for live polling from the comfort of your very own phone. So please remember to fill out our feedback form after the session because we're looking to constantly improve the app and get any feedback we can. Thank you so much, and I hope you guys enjoy using Polo today. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. Okay, so we're going to not start with Polo yet, but if you haven't downloaded it yet on TestFlight and you have an iOS device, do that like right now. The link is on the screen. Okay, so one thing that you might see in your console when you're working on an Xcode project is you're going to get a bunch of like NS layout constraint errors, and your app's not going to like crash or anything, but this is kind of annoying because that means that you have two constraints or more that are conflicting, and that means that the screen doesn't really know what to do with your UI view or like your label or stuff like that. So one helpful tool that you might have that might come in handy is WTF_AutoLayout.com. WTF stands for why the failure. So you just copy and paste the stuff between the two parentheses. So like the NS layout constraint, whatever, and it'll give you like a really helpful and beautiful like interface for like visualizing what these constraints are, and then you can figure out which one doesn't belong or like is incorrect, and then you can fix it from there. All right, I just wanted to quickly address some other ways of doing UI in iOS because you might have been Googling around while you're doing your projects, and you might see these kinds of solutions on like Stack Overflow or just on like Medium blog posts on the internet. So these two ways are frame-based and storyboards. So what frame-based is basically when you create a UI view, you instantiate it using a frame instead of how we set like the constraints and we activate them. And so the code down here is basically specifying the x, y, width, and height specifically with respect to the screen. So if you think about the screen is like just a coordinate system where 0, 0 is the top left, this is saying this blue rectangle is 224 from the top, 80 from the left, and the width and height are fixed at 160 and 80. And the reason why we don't use this is now there's like a gazillion new phone sizes and screen sizes, and so maybe it looks good on like the iPhone 7 to have this look like this, but then on the iPhone 10 or the 10R, it's going to look completely different, and it's not going to look good. Another way is storyboards, which is more of like a quick drag and drop tool that you might see. It's not super intuitive to use. Basically, you have to like manually like specify all the constraints, and so here you're specifying the width and height constraints of 160 and 80. And the reason why we don't use this or teach this is it's really hard to collaborate with other people using storyboards, basically because the storyboards are stored in like an XML type of file, and you can't actually like read or understand what like exactly is going on the screen. So let's start with our first poll. So if everyone could open up Polo. Oh, sorry. Here's the code. We can start with this first. So make sure that you can like join the poll, and then I'll make some announcements. So it's VO, like opera, not 0. 3TFI. Okay. So now, can we use frames or storyboards in our projects? And then you should be able to see a poll right now, and everyone vote. I'm going to give you like 30 seconds. Oh, Um, Possibly. It might be a little buggy also. All right. So most of you said no, which is correct. No, you are not allowed to use frames or storyboards in your projects. You are free to explore these basically in your own time, but we teach NS layout constraint for a reason. We want it to be consistent for everyone, and especially when grading. So just keep that in mind. And then some quick announcements. So we got a lot of extension requests very last minute on Sunday. And our policy is that extensions must be requested 24 hours in advance. So that means the deadline to request an extension is Saturday night. We understand it's prelim season. You're probably all super busy. We understand that. We're students too. But we don't want to keep seeing people trying to request last minute extensions all the time. It's just not good practice. And we have the right to deny you an extension. So basically, if we see you kind of abusing this extension request every single week for every single project, we probably won't accept that after a certain point. Another thing is, please do not email us. Personally, it's just more difficult to keep all of our communication organized if it's kind of scattered throughout our personal email, the Cornell App Dev email, Piazza, and stuff like that. If you ever want to get in contact with us, please post a private post on Piazza. But if you absolutely think that you need to email, we have a new email specifically for our courses. So you can email courses@cornellappdev.com. Team@cornellappdev.com is more reserved for their app dev team related stuff, as opposed to the courses of iOS backend and design. Does anyone have any questions about that? All right, cool. So now let's do some review. So we're going to go back to using Polo. How would you center a UI view in the center of the screen? So here are 3 constraints. Let's say the view is called MyView. MyView.center x anchor equal to center x anchor, or view center x anchor. There's a leading anchor and the center y anchor. So let's try this out. All right. Oh, it got cut off. But the poll should be live. And so vote on your phones. Can anyone see it? Oh, God. Okay, hold on. Let me try this again. Okay, yeah. So there's 5 options, so pick the correct one. And read all of the constraints carefully. Oh, yep, sorry, the session code? Yep. Is it not working?
Are you on test flight? Or
I'm on Polo.
the App Store?
Yeah.
Oh, the App Store version won't work. You need to download the test flight one. Yeah, sorry.
Now I can't press O.
Oh, yeah.
Can you repeat the session code again?
Yeah, it's VO3TFI. Okay. So I'm going to end the poll. And most of you said E, which is correct. Can anyone explain why? Someone want to explain why? I'm going to call on someone. Yeah.
Doesn't A just center the X coordinate and then Y center the Y coordinate, and you have to have both centered?
Yeah, that's correct. So basically, you need to have both the center X and center Y anchors activated in order to center it in the center of the screen. Great. Okay, so now let's move on to how do we actually create multi-view apps. And so right now we've only dealt with putting buttons and labels and text views on our one screen. But there's actually 2 ways of presenting and displaying new view controllers. So the first way is using something called a UINavigationController. And what this is basically you have a navigation stack. And what this is saying is your root view controller is basically the one that's first presented to you when you open the app. And then you can use your navigation controller to push new view controllers in front of your current view controller, and then you can pop them off to display the view controllers underneath. And so the way you do this in code is navigation. This would be like in your view controller. You would do navigation controller dot push view controller, and then the new view controller that you've created, and then animated is just like you get that nice slide-in effect, and that's a boolean that you can set to true or false. And the reason why navigation controller isn't optional is because your view controller might not be embedded inside a UI navigation controller. Just like our apps from like Project 2, there was no navigation controller. You actually have to create it separately and then embed your view controllers inside. And we'll have an example of this in code later. So here's an example in the Photos app. So most of the time you can identify when there is a UI navigation controller by that like gray bar on the top with the title, and then there's usually like bar button items on like the left and right side. So here we can see if I click on screenshots, it'll go my screenshots, and then I can click albums to go back. And that's basically pushing that view controller of the screenshots, or like the time-lapse view controller, onto the top of the screen. And then I can pop it off by clicking the back button. All right, so here's kind of another like display of this. So basically, you have that navigation bar on the top, and then you can see kind of in this like stack of like layers, you have your root view controller at the very back, and then you can have custom views that are pushed on top, and that's the one that you see. So another way that you can present things on your screen or present new view controllers is by using Modal Presentation. And this basically is saying it's going to slide from the bottom of the screen up on top of your previous one, and there's no navigation stack. So you can't actually really keep track of which one is the root or like which view controller you're currently being presented. It's basically you have two simple commands in code. One is present and one is dismiss. So we can see here in code, if I make a view controller called my view controller, I can call present on the current view controller that I'm in, and it'll show this new my view controller, and it'll be animated. Completion is basically like if you want something to happen as soon as the view controller is presented, you can like specify it in some code there, but you don't have to worry about that for now. And then if you want to dismiss the current view controller back to like the previous one, you can call dismiss and then animated true, completion nil. So here's an example of this in Ithaca Transit. So if I click the information button, the modal will present up, and then you can click done and it'll dismiss. So notice how it presents from the bottom, slides up, and then it dismisses back down, and there's like no navigation stack. So does anyone have any questions about like navigation controller versus modal? Okay, cool. So now let's talk about a pretty common programming concept called model view controller. And this will come in handy when you're building your apps and modeling your data. So it's a pretty common design pattern. And basically you have three kind of components in your app. One is the model, one is the view, and one is the controller. And so basically the controller is basically coordinating the data between the model, which is like a class or like an object or something, and the view, which is what the user actually sees and interacts with on screen. So let's say you're tapping like a button, and a button is a view, right? And the view is placed on the screen. So when the view like receives that tap, the controller actually notifies it, and maybe it has to update a model or like a model object that like something has changed. So that's why the screens that like the code that we use is called UIView because you can actually control the components of the view. So here's an example in like Ithaca Transit. So the model would be like all the bus stop objects that are handled by the app. The view could be like a list or like a table that displays the list of all the bus stops. And then the controller can listen to this user selection to update the view. So for example, if I want to go to the commons, like the controller has to update the view so that it shows like routes to the commons, and then it updates the list of bus stops to display. So yeah. Does anyone have any questions about model view controller? Okay, cool. So now let's talk about how we actually pass information between view controllers and between screens. So there's this concept in iOS called delegation. And so basically what this means is that you can specify a protocol. And a protocol is very similar to like an interface in Java, which is basically like a series of functions or variables that must be implemented in one view controller, and then another view controller can actually call those methods to perform certain actions. So this is basically saying, based on a protocol, one object or like a view controller can delegate another object to perform an action that's specified by the protocol. And this might be a little bit confusing right now, but let's go through an analogy. So let's say we have a restaurant. There's three things. So there's a chef, there's a customer, and there's a menu. So the chef basically knows how to make all of these items on the menu, and the customer can then order items off the menu, and based on what they order, the chef is going to cook it, right? So what is the menu modeling in this situation? Like based on what we just said. Yeah.
That's the protocol?
Yeah, it's the protocol. So the menu is a protocol, and the customer can delegate the chef to make their food because they know the menu. So the menu clearly specifies like what the customer can order and then what the chef can make. All right, so let's see this like in a code example. So let's say we have a protocol called menu delegate, and this delegate has just one function. So this is like our menu. Let's say there's just one item called steak, and it's going to be just a function called make steak. And then let's say we have a chef, and the chef basically implements the menu delegate. And so we can see here, like after the initializers, whatever, we have a function called make steak. Because of this protocol called menu delegate, we have to implement the make steak function, and we're just going to print cooking the steak in here. And then now let's say we have a class called customer. They have a variable called delegate, which is representing kind of like the menu, and whatever, there's an initializer, and now they have a function called order steak. And this is basically going to delegate the chef or anyone else who knows the menu to make the steak. So now that we have this information, what's going to happen if we create a chef object, we create a customer object, and set its delegate to be the chef, and we have the customer order the steak? Does anyone have any idea what would happen? Yeah.
Is like the print statement going to be triggered?
Yeah, so it's going to print cooking the steak. And the reason why is because since we set the customer's delegate to be chef, when customer.orderSteak is fired, it's going to call delegate.makeSteak, and that makeSteak function is implemented in chef. And so that's why the print statement is going to be printed. Does anyone have any questions about this? Yeah.
Why are you making it the function order steak as delegate.makeSteak? Why is it delegate?
Yeah, sure. So are you saying in the customer class?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the question was, why are you saying delegate.makeSteak in the customer class? And the reason is because we don't know, we just have like a variable called delegate that's basically anyone who has implemented the menu delegate. So we can't say chef.makeSteak because we don't know necessarily from just like, let's say there's like a set of doors and you can't see the chef. It's basically just like anyone that has the menu and knows how to make it can make the steak. So if we have a variable that holds on to anyone who can implement, that has implemented menu delegate, then we can call make steak. So that's why it's delegate.makeSteak.
So is it like an interface?
Yeah, it's like almost exactly like an interface. Yeah. Yeah.
Can a class implement multiple protocols?
Good question. Can a class implement multiple protocols? The answer is yes. So basically, if you want to implement multiple, you can do menu delegate, comma, whatever. Another way that I'll show later is you can do extension chef, colon, blank delegate, and it's like the same thing. Any other questions? Okay, cool. All right, so now let's see this in like a more practical perspective in like iOS development. So this is a protocol called change color delegate, and there's a function that's basically saying if another view controller changed some color, I want to hold on to this information and do something with it. So let's say we have a function called didChangeColor to new color UI color, and now in our view controller, this is how we would actually specify an extension of the view controller implements change color delegate. So this means that we can have our class view controller, whatever, with our like viewDid load, our UI elements, whatever, and then we can have this other block of code that is still part of view controller, but it's kind of separated out so you know that only this code block is regarding like the change color delegate. So let's say here we implement it, and when another view controller changes their color, we want to set the label's background color to this new color. And so in the other view controller, we have, let's say, this function called presentViewController, and we can actually set, let's say the other view controller has a variable called delegate, and we can now set the delegate to our own class because we implemented the change color delegate. And so now, let's say we like present it, and in other view controller we kind of like change the color or something like that. And now we want to tell the other view controller to change the color. So now we can say delegate.didChangeColor to red, and this is going to tell the original view controller now that the color has changed to red, and now we want to change the label's background color to red. And the reason why this is weak var delegate and it's optional is basically because of something called like memory reference cycles. We want to avoid those in Swift. In like the commented lecture code, I'll have like a link to a blog post explaining more. You don't really have to worry about it, but this is just good practice so that your app doesn't like bloat in memory because your two view controllers are referencing each other. Does anyone have any questions about this? Okay, cool. So basically, to reiterate, before we present other view controller, we set the delegate to view controller by doing other view controller dot delegate equals self. And then here, this is going to call the method didChangeColor in that view controller class. Not other view controller, but view controller. Okay, let's open up Xcode. So we're going to go and make a single view app. I'm going to call it lecture 3. And then you can save it anywhere. I'm just going to save it on my desktop. Okay, so once again we have to delete the storyboard and change the info.plist. So we're going to go to main.storyboard. We're going to click delete. My computer's so slow. And then move to trash. And then we're going to go to our info.plist. And then main storyboard file base name, we're just going to click the minus button. And then save that. And then, does anyone remember what we do in app delegate? What do we have to do? Does anyone remember what we do here? Okay, to remind you, it's window equals UI window, and then we do frame UI screen dot main dot bounds. So this is creating the window. We can specify the window's root equals, so we're just going to set it to view controller for now. And then we do window dot make key and visible. That's okay, so this is basically creating the window. Now we can set the root view controller to be the view controller. which is just this file over here. And then we just make that visible and then display it on screen. Okay. Now that we have this, let's go to View Controller. And right now we have nothing, but go to Piazza and there should be a pinned post. I'm on the wrong Piazza. So you can see all this code for this part 1, viewcontroller.swift. Just copy and paste all this into your viewcontroller.swift. So just delete this and then paste. So you should have all this code here. And basically what we're going to do in this demo is we're going to have 2 buttons, and then when you click on one, we're going to use that like navigation controller to push a new blue view controller onto the screen. And then on the other one, we're going to have a modal view controller that presents modally, a red view controller. And then there's going to be a text field where we can change the title of the button on the original screen. Okay, so once everyone has done this, let's actually create our navigation controller. So in here, do you see how we have window.rootViewController equals viewcontroller? Instead of doing this, if we want to use a navigation controller, we actually set the root view controller of our window to be a UINavigationController. And so once you have that, you can open the parentheses and you can see this one with a root view controller of UIView And so here we want there to be a UINavigationController, which has that nice like bar on the top. And then the main like view controller that we want to see first is just view controller. So we want to create an instance of that. So if we run this, there we go. Okay. So if we run it, we'll see that we have these 2 buttons. You can tell that we've embedded it inside a navigation controller because of this like grayed out bar on the top. And then we have these 2 buttons and they currently don't do anything. So one says push navigation VC and the other one says present modal VC, change my name. Does everyone have this? And if you have any questions, like raise your hand, or like if you have technical difficulties also, is it left hand for technical difficulties, right hand for question for me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so now that we have this, let's say we want to put like a nice little title at the top, because you probably have seen like in the Photos app or in like other similar apps with the navigation controller, you want to set a title. And the way you do that is under this comment, we can just do title equals, let's call it navigation demo. And so we can set the title to a screen or to a string. And now if we do this and rerun it, we'll be able to see the button on the top, or the title on the top. So you can see navigation demo here. All right, cool. So now that we have this, let's actually implement this push navigation VC functionality. So basically what we want it to do is to push a new view controller with like a blue background. So to create a new view controller, we can do Command N to create a new file, and we want to create a Cocoa Touch class. And then so we want to make a UIView subclass, and let's call it Blue View Controller. We can click Next, just click Create, and now we have this new class called Blue View Controller. You can ignore this stuff on the bottom, but basically let's set the view.background color to be blue, so that we know that it's a blue view controller. And then similar to the original view controller, we can set the title because Yeah, because we can. And we'll present it using the navigation controller so that when you go from the original home page and you push on this one, the title will actually change to Blue VC. Okay, so now that we've done this, let's go back to our view controller. And so there's currently a button called Push Nav View Controller button, and we've added the target so that the function Push Nav View Controller is going to be fired every time you touch inside the button. And so now we want to implement this Push Nav View Controller. So let's say, so in order to push, like the code example I showed in the slides, let Blue View Controller equal Blue View Controller. So this is creating the new view controller. And then now to present it, we can do navigation controller dot push view controller. And then, so the view controller that we want to push is the blue view controller. And then we want it to have that nice like sliding effect. So animated is going to be set to true. And so now that we have this code, basically we can run it. And so now we still have like our nice title at the top. It says navigation demo. Now if I push, or if I click the push navigation VC button, it'll push, and you can see now that the title says blue VC. The background is blue, and there's like a back button, so I can go back. So notice how if I go back and I click on this again, it slides in. There's like a nice title bar at the top, which means that now like the view hierarchy of the UI navigation controller is the view controller, and then on top of it is this blue view controller. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay, cool. So now that we've done this, let's
Go to blue view controller for like 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Let's see, just set the title back.
Yeah. For if anyone needs to see this again. Do you have a question? Okay. Can you guys help them? Someone needs help over there. Okay. Now let's create another view controller called like Modal View Controller, and this one will present modally. And so when we create it, it's just going to be a subclass of UIView Controller, and it's just going to be called Modal View Controller. We can click Next, and then Create. And so now we have another view controller here. And let's set the background. Actually, we have the code for this. So if we go back, we have all this code, and basically you can just copy and paste this over. So I can just highlight all of this and paste it in. And so basically what this view controller is going to have is a button and a text field. Oh wait, we can comment that out for now. So you can comment out this line if it gives you an error. But basically there's going to be a button and a text field where you can enter in text. And what the button does is it's going to dismiss this current view controller back to the one that we saw before with the 2 buttons. And when you dismiss, the text in the text field is going to replace the name of the button on the original screen. So basically where I got all this code from is from the Piazza post in like modalviewcontroller.swift. Okay, so how are we going to pass the information from the text field, or from the text field in this view controller back to the other view controller? So the first thing we're going to want to do is make a protocol to kind of specify how we're going to communicate between these two view controllers. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to say protocol change view controller text button text delegate. You can make it shorter, but the good thing about Xcode is that it has autocomplete features that are really powerful, so you're never going to actually fully type out this title, which is why if you'll see in a lot of, just like in Apple's documented code and stuff like that, all of like the names of things are like super long because they want to be as clear as possible because the autocomplete is so good. So what do we want to actually specify in our protocol? We want to specify that the view controllers, like the text field text has changed. So we can say func field or text field text changed. And then we can say to new string of type string. And so this is basically saying the text field's text has now changed to a new string, and this is the information that we're going to pass between the two view controllers, is basically this new string variable. Does anyone have any questions about like defining the protocol? It's kind of confusing. Okay, so now that we have this, we need to be able to kind of delegate from our modal view controller when the text has changed, so that view controllers who implement this function can have this function be called, and then it'll update accordingly. Yeah?
Is 2 a keyword here?
Yeah, so to is kind of like a caller, callee, like, I don't really know what it's exactly called, but basically, when you call this function, it'll just say text field text change to, and then new string is just implied inside the body of the function. Okay, so let's implement this function inside view controller. So if I scroll down, one way you can do it is by just doing UIView comma change view controller button text delegate. But another way you can do it is by, if you want to separate your code out and make it a little bit cleaner, you can do extension view controller and then change view controller button text delegate. And these two do the exact same thing. This one just kind of sections off this piece of code to specifically implement the function specified in this protocol. So this is getting angry and red at me because it says type view controller does not conform to this delegate. Do you want to add protocol stubs? And basically this is saying, hey, you said you were going to conform to this protocol, but you haven't actually yet. That's because we're missing the function. So if I click fix, you'll see this func text field change to new string, which is the exact function signature we saw up here. And so what do we actually want to happen in view controller is we want to change the title of the button, right? So if we have that button called present modal view controller button, does anyone remember how we change or set the title of that button? So if I say present modal view controller button dot, how do I change the title? Yeah. So it's going to be present modal view controller button set title, and we want to set the title to our new string, and then for the state it's just going to be normal. Okay, so now that we have this, let's go into our modal view controller. And here we actually want to have a variable called delegate that will be of type like change button, whatever, delegate. So we're going to make it weak var delegate, change view controller button text delegate, and it's optional because it's possible that there was no view controller before this, or we can't actually relay that information. So now that we have this, when we click the button that says dismiss view controller and save text, we can say delegate dot, and then we can see that it says text field text change to, and then we can actually explicitly set what text we want to change that button text or button title to be. So if we have a text field with text entered into it, how do we access that? And like, what do we put here for string? Does anyone know? The text field is called text field. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So this is basically saying we want our text field to change to text field.text because if we type something in and we want the delegate to like change the title of the button on the original screen, this is how we would do it. Does anyone know why I'm getting this error? Does anyone want to guess? Yes.
Because the text field might be empty, in which case it's nil.
Yeah, good. So the answer was the text field might be empty, and so the text would be nil. That's correct. Basically, if you try and type textfield.text, you can see that it's of type optional string, which means that there could be nothing. And we don't want the button's title on the other screen to be like empty because, or like the empty string also, because then like how do you click on it, right? So one thing that we can do is actually wrap this whole thing in an if-let so that we can safely retrieve out the text from the text field. So if let text equals text field.text, and then we can also specify a condition as well. So we can say text is not equal to the empty string, and then we can change this and put it inside here. And then we can say delegate.text field text change to, and now we know that text is going to be non-nil and it's not going to be the empty string. So we can hopefully see it. So now we can say the text field changed to text, and we know for sure that the text is of type string. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay, cool. So now that we have this information, we can actually try presenting our view controller. So we can try presenting our modal view controller from our view controller. So if I go back to viewcontroller.swift, in this function called present modal view controller, this is basically the target of the present modal button. We can create a modal view controller. So let modal view controller equals modal view controller, and then we can just call present. And then you can see it's this one, present view controller to present animated whatever. So the view controller that we want to present is called modal view controller. We want it to slide up from the bottom of the screen, and then just specify that as nil. Okay, so now if we try running this, basically we should be able to present our modal view controller. So we've seen here there's this blue one, and now we can present. So notice how there's a title at the top of this one, and you can go back. If I click this, it's going to slide up from the bottom, and there's going to be a text field, I think, yeah. And then notice how there's no navigation bar at the top. There's no way to set the title. And then we should be able to dismiss, but does anyone know why we can't? Yeah, do you have a question? Oh. Yeah.
We didn't pop the navigation controller.
Close. So there's no navigation stack, right? Because this is presented modally. Does anyone remember? So we called present here, right? But in modal view controller, when we say dismiss view controller and save text, did we ever dismiss the view controller? No, right? So that's why we can't dismiss. So here we can call dismiss. So similar to present, animated is true so that it swipes downward, and then you can specify completion to be nil. Does anyone have questions about that? Okay, so let's try running this. So now we can present the modal view controller from the bottom. It'll swipe up. And then, so now if I change it to hi everyone, and I click dismiss and save text, what's going to happen is it's going to go through this if let. If the text is not the empty string, which we know it's not, and it's not nil, we also know that's not, this function called text field text changed is going to be fired from the delegate. But the thing is, delegate is going to be nil right now. And the reason why is because in view controller, when we created this modal view controller, we didn't specify the delegate variable to be anything. So if we actually try and call dismiss and save text, it's going to dismiss, but nothing's going to happen. And the reason why is because we didn't set the variable of modal view controller.delegate to be self, so that this specific function in view controller is called. So we have to do modal view controller.delegate equals self. And what that's saying is this view controller that I'm in, view controller, has conformed to this protocol called change view controller button text delegate. And when I call delegate dot whatever in modal view controller, this function is going to fire. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay, so now let's try again by rerunning it. So now if I go to present modal, I can change it to hi, and then I click dismiss, we can see that the text has changed of this button. And that's because in our modal view controller, we called delegate.textFieldTextChanged, and this function is implemented in view controller here. So that's kind of how like the chain of functions is called. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, cool. So now let's say we actually want to pass this text to be like the filler text for the text field. So right now, if I go click on hi everyone, there's nothing in this like text field. That like it would just be nice if I could see like what the name of the button was before, and like so I can change it to something else maybe. And one way you can do that is by creating like a custom initializer for your view controller. And so just like we did in like the first lecture with classes, we can create an init method. And let's say we want a placeholder text for our text field, and it's of type string. And so if we want this to happen, we also have to create a variable called, actually I'll put it up here. So we can create a placeholder text of type string, and you might get this error that says like required initializer init coder. Just click fix. You don't really have to worry about this. Just fix it, or yeah, click fix and it'll implement for you. And so here you're going to want to do similar to any other class, self.placeholder equals placeholder. And then you want to call super.init with this nib name bundle, and then you can set both of these to nil. And so basically what this is doing is, first we're initializing our placeholder text, and then we're just calling the super.init on like the UIView constructor, so that the view controller is actually like properly initialized. And you don't have to worry about like what nib name and bundle mean. Just make them both nil. Okay, so now that we've done this, we can uncomment this placeholder text line. So now we can say text field.text equals placeholder text. So now anytime I present the view controller, the placeholder will show up in the text field. So now I'm probably going to get an error in our modal view controller, because now modal view controller, you can't just initialize like this anymore. We created a custom initializer. So if I do modal view controller, now we can see that there's this new custom initializer with placeholder text of type string. And the placeholder text that we want is the button's title. So it's going to be present modal view controller button dot title label dot title or text. What?
Is a title for function?
Title for function?
If you go back,
Mm-hmm.
you button dot title. The function. Click on one.
Oh. Title for dot normal. Because that's the name of the title that we got there. And you can see here that the title might be nil because we might not have set it in the beginning. And the safest thing to do is unwrap it so that we have like if let button title equals whatever. But in this case, we know for sure that we set the title correctly. So here is like one example of where it might be okay to force unwrap it with an exclamation point. So now if I run it, it should kind of maintain that title so that when I go from this view controller to the modal one, it'll actually maintain that title. So if I do this, you can see that it says present modal VC, change my name. Now I can click on it and change it to something else. I dismiss it, and now the title has changed to something else. And now if I want to click this again, this this placeholder text is going to be reset to something else. And I click here, text field now has something else in it. Now I can type whatever. Does anyone have any questions about that? Yeah. Yeah, sure. So this custom initializer. Okay. Does anyone else have any questions about anything? Okay. Cool. So just a couple of things left. So basically, make sure to fill out the Polo feedback form. I think it's on Piazza already. Project 3 is out after this class. It'll be due on Sunday at 11:59. Happy St. Patrick's Day. As a reminder, the ad deadline is March 18th. Another thing is Project 3, there are a lot of concepts that are similar to our lecture demo, but the best way for you to learn is to rewrite everything out manually, with like trying not to look at the lecture code as much as possible until you get stuck. This way it's like really a lot better for you to kind of absorb and take in the information that you learned today. So just so you know, like don't just copy and paste this entire like lecture or just like work off of this lecture to build your project, because we will know and it will make us very sad. Okay, thank you.